was really good for me when we were just playing.
Hey Joe, are you getting anything now?
Oh, hey, Joe, it's me. Joe, can you hear me? Joe. Hey, Joe. Hey, Joe. I don't know how to play that song. Hey, Joe. Here's the nasally, not Jimi Hendrix version. Hey, Joe. It's the nasally, not quite Jimi Hendrix version. Going down and shoot my old lady. Caught her messing around with another man. Joe. Joe, purple haze, Joe. 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 Hey, Joe. Trying to get to that tiny little speaker, man. Hey, Joe. I caught her messing around with another man. Yes, I did. Running to get the other speaker cable. Yeah. Yeah, it's me. The guy named me. Talking about. Sorry? Oh no! That's the worst. Yep. I'm back, baby. It's your friend, Jacob. Man. Is he getting the sound? Is he getting the sound? Is he getting the sound? We got the cool lights. We got it at the cult church. We got the cool lights. We're gonna stream the music over the cool lights at the cult church, yeah. 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 At the those apples? Yeah, right. It is. Like yeah. That's my Nate Smith impression. Or the. I don't. If we have time, I think we have to. Yep. Joe. Hey, Joe.
if I could get a little down, is that possible?
Owen wants
down.
a little less sax. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have time for that? I don't want to cut into. Yeah, real short. We'll keep it cool. Some days again? Or
5, 6, 7, 8.
no, let's do Dear Do You Love Me?
Okay, cool.
Dear, do you love me? And if you don't love me, what do you love? Do you love the way it's okay to say I love just about 10 different ways, but you just don't fit the bill. Don't like the idea of you doesn't well. Dear, do you love me? Thank you so much. Wow. This is the best sound I've ever had.
No, I can hear. Morning, Jeeves, I said. Jeeves in the Springtime by P.G. Woodhouse. How we doing? Okay, I can do a little more. I say, Jeeves, a man I met at the club last night told me to put my shirt on privateer. I should not advocate it, sire. The stable is not sanguine. Getting a lot of monitor. I don't need any. Talking of shirts, I said, have those mauve ones that I ordered arrived yet? Yes, sir, I sent them back. Sent them back? Yes, sir, they would not have become you. Let's try another voice. We good? Yeah. All right. Hello and welcome to Superior Shorts Plague Edition, Saturday night. This is Jeeves in the Springtime by P.G. Woodhouse. I'm Chris Nollet. Morning, Jeeves, I said. Good morning, sir, said Jeeves. He put the good old cup of tea softly on the table by my bed, and I took a refreshing sip. Just right as usual. A most amazing cove, Jeeves. So dashed competent in every respect. Every other valet I've ever had used to barge into my room in the morning while I was still asleep, causing much misery. But Jeeves seems to know when I'm awake by a sort of telepathy. He always floats in with the cup exactly 2 minutes after I come to life. How's the weather, Jeeves? Exceptionally clement, sir. I say, Jeeves, a man I met at the club last night told me to put my shirt on privateer for the 2 o'clock race this afternoon. How about it? I should not advocate it, sir. The stable is not sanguine. That was enough for me. Jeeves knows. How, I couldn't say, but he knows. You know, there was a time when I would laugh lightly and go ahead and lose my little all against his advice, but not now. Talking of shirts, I said, have those mauve ones I ordered arrived yet? Yes, sir. I sent them back. Sent them back? Yes, sir. They would not have become you. Well, I must say, I thought fairly highly of those shirtings, but I bowed to superior knowledge. Most fellows, no doubt, are all for having their valets confine their activities to creasing trousers without trying to run the home. But it's different with Jeeves. Right from the first day he came to me, I have looked on him as a sort of guide, philosopher, and friend. Mr. Little rang up on the telephone a few minutes ago, sir. He mentioned that he had a matter of importance to discuss with you, but confided no details. Oh, well, I expect I shall be seeing him at the club. No doubt, sir. I wasn't in what you might call a fever of impatience. Bingo Little is a chap I was at school with, and we see a lot of each other still. He's the nephew of old Mortimer Little, who retired from business recently with a goodish pile. Bingo biffs around London on a pretty comfortable allowance given to him by his uncle, and leads on the whole a fairly unclouded life. It wasn't likely that anything which he described as a matter of importance would turn out to be really so frightfully important. After breakfast, I went to the open window to inspect the day. Jeeves, I said. Sir? You were absolutely right about the weather. It is a juicy morning, spring and all that. Yes, sir. In spring, Jeeves, a livelier iris gleams upon the burnished dove. So I have been informed, sir. Righto, I'm going into the park to do pastoral dances. I don't know if you know that sort of feeling you get on days round about the end of April and the beginning of May, when the sky's a light blue with cotton wool clouds and there's a bit of a breeze blowing in from the west. I'm not much of a ladies' man, but on this particular morning, what it seemed to me that I really wanted was some charming girl to buzz up and ask me to save her from assassins or something. So it was a bit of an anticlimax when I merely ran into young Bingo Little, looking perfectly foul in a crimson satin tie decorated with horseshoes. "Hello, Bertie," said Bingo. "My God, man!" I gargled. The cravat, the gent's neckwear. Why? For what reason? Oh, the tie. He blushed. I was given it. He seemed a bit embarrassed, so I dropped the subject. We toddled along a bit and sat down on a couple of chairs by the Serpentine. Jeeves tells me you want to talk about something, I said. Eh? Said Bingo with a start. Yes. Yes. I waited for him to unleash the topic of the day, but he didn't seem to want to get going. Conversation languished. He stared straight ahead of him in a glossy sort of manner. I say, Bertie, he said after a pause of about an hour and a quarter, do you like the name Mabel? No. You don't think there's a kind of music in the word, like the wind rustling gently through the treetops? No. He seemed disappointed for a moment, and then cheered up. Oh, of course you wouldn't. You always were without any soul, weren't you? Well, just as you say. Who is she? Tell me all. For I realize now that poor old Bingo was going through it once again. Ever since I've known him, he has been perpetually falling in love with someone, generally in the spring. At school, he had the finest collection of actresses' photographs of anyone of his time, and at Oxford, his romantic nature was a byword. You'd better come along and meet her at lunch, he said, looking at his watch. Oh, a ripe suggestion, I said. Where are you meeting her? At the Ritz? Near the Ritz. He was geographically accurate. About 50 yards east of the Ritz, there's one of those blighted tea and bun shops you see dotted all over London. And into this, if you'll believe me, young Bingo dived. And before I had time to say a word, we were wedged in at a table. Why was he lunching the girl at this godforsaken eatery? It couldn't be because he was hard up. Just then the waitress arrived, rather a pretty girl. Aren't we going to wait? I started to say to Bingo, thinking it somewhat thick that, in addition to asking a girl to lunch with him in a place like this, he should fling himself on the foodstuffs before she turned up, when I caught sight of his face and stopped. The man was goggling. His entire map was suffused with a rich blush. He looked like the soul's awakening done in pink. Hello, Mabel, he said with a sort of gulp. Hello, said the girl. Mabel, said Bingo, this is Bertie Wooster, a pal of mine. Pleased to meet you, she said. You see, I'm wearing the tie, said Bingo. Oh, it suits you beautiful, said the girl. Personally, if anyone had told me that a tie like that had suited me, I should have risen and struck them. But poor old Bingo simply got all flustered with gratification and smirked in the most gruesome manner. Well, what's it going to be today? Asked the girl, introducing the business touch into the conversation. I'll have a cup of cocoa, cold veal and ham pie, a slice of fruitcake, and a macaroon. Same for you, Bertie? I gazed at the man, revolted. That he could have been a pal of mine all these years and think me capable of insulting the old turn with this sort of stuff cut me to the quick. Or how about a bit of hot steak pudding with a sparkling lime motto to wash it down, said Bingo. You know, the way love can change a fellow is really frightful. This chappie before me, who spoke in that absolutely careless way of macaroons and lime motto, was the man I had seen in happier days, telling the head waiter at Claridge's exactly how he wanted the chef to prepare the sole frite au gourmet au champignon, and saying he would jolly well sling it back if it wasn't just right. A roll and a butter and a small coffee seemed the only things on the list that hadn't been specially prepared by the nastier members of the Borgia family for people they had a particular grudge against. So I chose them, and Mabel hopped it. Well, said Bingo rapturously, I took it that he wanted my opinion of the female poisoner who had just left us. Very nice, I said. He seemed dissatisfied. You don't think she's the most wonderful girl you've ever met? Oh, absolutely, I said to appease the blighter. Where did you meet her? At a subscription dance in Camberwell. What on earth are you doing at a subscription dance at Camberwell? Your man Jeeves asked me if I'd buy a couple of tickets. It was in aid of some charity or another. Jeeves? I didn't know he went in for that sort of thing. Well, I suppose he has to relax a bit now and then.
Anyway, he was there swinging a dashed efficient shoe. I hadn't meant to go at first, but I turned up for a lark. If I hadn't gone, I shouldn't have met Mabel. Bertie, he said, I want your advice.
Well, carry on.
Well, at least not your advice, because that wouldn't be much good to anybody. I mean, you're pretty much a consummate old ass, aren't you? Not that I want to hurt your feelings, of course.
No, I see that.
What I wish you would do is put the whole thing to that fellow Jeeves of yours and see what he suggests. You've often told me he's helped other pals of yours out of messes. From what you tell me, he's by way of being the brains of the family.
Well, he's never yet let me down.
Then put my case to him.
What case?
Why, you poor fish, my uncle, of course. What do you think my uncle's going to say to all this? If I spring it on him cold, he'd tie himself in knots on the hearthrug. Well, somehow or other, his mind's got to be prepared to receive the news. But how? You see, I'm pretty well dependent on the old boy. If he cut off my allowance, I should be very much in the soup. So you put the whole binge to Jeeves and see if he can't scare up a happy ending somehow.
Oh, undoubtedly, I said. I wasn't in the least surprised at Bingo wanting to lug Jeeves into his private affairs like this. It was the first thing I would have thought of doing myself. If anybody could fix things for poor old Bingo, he could. I stated the case to him that night after dinner. Jeeves? Sir?
Are you busy right now?
No, sir.
I mean, not doing anything in particular?
No, sir. It is my practice at this hour to read some improving book, but if you desire my services, this can easily be postponed or indeed abandoned altogether.
Well, I want your advice. It's about Mr. Little.
Young Mr. Little, sir, or the elder Mr. Little, his uncle, who lives in Ponsby Gardens?
Jeeves seemed to know everything. I'd been pally with Bingo practically all my life, and yet I didn't remember ever having heard that his uncle lived anywhere in particular. How did you know he lived in Ponsby Gardens? I said.
I am on terms of some intimacy with the elder Mr. Little's cook, sir. In fact, there's an understanding.
I'm bound to say this gave me a bit of a start. Somehow I'd never thought of Jeeves going in for that sort of thing. Do you mean you're engaged?
It may be said to amount to that, sir. She is a remarkably excellent cook, sir, said Jeeves, as though he felt called upon to give some explanation. What was it you wished to ask me about Mr. Little?
I sprang the details on him. And that's how the matter stands, Jeeves, I said. Tell me about old Mr. Little. What sort of a chap is he?
A somewhat curious character, sir. Since retiring from business, he has become a great recluse, and now devotes himself almost entirely to the pleasures of the table.
Greedy hog, you mean?
I would not, perhaps, take the liberty of describing him in precisely those terms, sir. He is what is usually called a gourmet, very particular about what he eats, and for that reason sets a high value on Miss Watson's services.
The cook?
Yes, sir.
Well, it looks to me as though our best plan would be to shoot young Bingo in on him after dinner one night.
The difficulty is, sir, that at the moment Mr. Little is on a diet, owing to an attack of gout. I fancy that the elder Mr. Little's misfortune may be turned to the younger Mr. Little's advantage. I was speaking only the other day to Mr. Little's valet, and he was telling me it has become his principal duty to read to Mr. Little in the evenings. If I were in your place, sir, I should send young Mr. Little to read to his uncle.
Nephew's devotion, you mean? Old man touched by kindly action, what?
Partly that, sir, but I would rely more on young Mr. Little's choice of literature.
Well, that's no good. Jolly old Bingo has a kind face, but when it comes to literature, he stops at the sporting times.
I would be happy to select books for Mr. Little to read. Perhaps I might explain my idea further.
I can't say I grasp it yet.
The method which I advocate, sir, is what I believe advertisers call direct suggestion, sir, consisting as it does of driving an idea home by constant repetition. You may have had experience of the system.
Oh, you mean they keep telling you that some soap or other is the best, and after a bit you come under the influence and charge round the corner and buy a cake?
Exactly, sir. I see no reason why it should not be adopted to bring about the desired result with regard to the subject's view on class distinctions. If young Mr. Little were to read day after day to his uncle a series of narratives in which marriage with young persons of an inferior social status was held up as both feasible and admirable, I fancy it would prepare the elder Mr. Little's mind for the reception of the information that his nephew wishes to marry a waitress in a tea shop. Are there books of that sort nowadays? Yes, sir, there are a great many, neglected by the reviewers, but widely read. You have never encountered All for Love by Rosie M. Banks? No. I have an aunt, sir, who owns an almost complete set of Rosie M. Bankses. I could easily borrow as many volumes as young Mr. Little might require. All right, then. Toddle round to your aunt's tomorrow and grab a couple of the fruitiest. We can but have a dash at it. Precisely, sir. Bingo reported 3 days later that Rosie M. Banks was the goods, and beyond a question the stuff to give the troops. Old Little had jibbed somewhat at first at the proposed change of literary diet, but Bingo had got Chapter 1 of All for Love past his guard before he knew what was happening, and after that there was nothing to it. Since then, they had finished A Red, Red Summer Rose, Madcap Myrtle, and Only a Factory Girl, and were halfway through The Courtship of Lord Strathmorlick. Bingo told me all this in a husky voice. The readings weren't doing a bit of good to the old vocal cords, which were beginning to show signs of cracking under the strain. But against this, you had to set the fact that he was making an undoubted hit in the right quarter, and also that after the evening's reading he also stayed beyond to dinner. And from what he told me, the dinners turned out by old Little's cook had to be tasted to be believed. There were tears in the old blighter's eyes as he got on the subject of the clear soup. I suppose to a fellow who'd been tackling macaroons and limado, it must have been like heaven. Anyhow, things seemed to be buzzing along quite satisfactorily, and Bingo said he had got an idea which he thought was going to clinch the thing. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he said it was a pippin. About a week after this, Bingo blew in with the news that his uncle's gout had ceased to trouble him, and on the morrow he would be back at the old stand working away with the knife and fork as before. "Oh, and by the way," said Bingo, "he wants you to lunch with him tomorrow." Me? Why me? He doesn't know I exist. "Oh, he wants to meet you, and take my tip, laddie, you go. I should think lunch tomorrow would be something special." I don't know why it was, but even then it struck me that there was something dashed odd, almost sinister, if you know what I mean, about young Bingo's manner. The old egg had the air of one who has something up his sleeve. "There's more to this than meets the eye," I said. "Why should your uncle ask a fellow to lunch whom he's never seen?" "I've been telling him all about you, that you're my best pal at school together and all that sort of thing." "Why are you so dashed keen on my going?" Bingo hesitated for a moment. "Well, I told you I'd got an idea. This is it. I want you to spring the news on him. I haven't the nerve to do it myself." "What? I'm hanged if I do." "And you call yourself a pal of mine?" "Well, yes, I know, but there are limits." "Bertie," said Bingo reproachfully, "I saved your life once." "When?" "Didn't I? Oh, it must have been some other fellow then. Well, anyway, we were boys together and all that. You can't let me down." "Oh, all right," I said. "But cheerio," said Bingo. 1:30 tomorrow. Don't be late." I'm bound to say that the more I contemplated the binge, the less I liked it. It was all very well for Bingo to say that I was slated for a magnificent lunch, but what good is the best possible lunch for a fellow if he's slung out on the street on his ear during the soup course? However, the word of a Wooster is his bond and all that rot. So, at 1:30 the next day, I tottered up the steps of number 16 Ponsby Gardens. And half a minute later, I was up in the drawing room shaking hands with the fattest man I have ever seen. "Mr. Wooster, I am gratified. I am proud. I am honored." It seemed to be that young Bingo must have boosted me to some purpose. "Oh, I said. You are very young to have accomplished so much.
I couldn't follow the train of thought. The family's always made rather a point that mine is a wasted life. I'm wondering if he couldn't have got me mixed up with someone else when the telephone bell rang outside in the hall and the maid came in to say that I was wanted. I buzzed down and found it was young Bingo. "Hello," said young Bingo. "So you're there. Good man. I knew I could rely on you. I say, old Crumpet, did my uncle seem pleased to meet you?" "Well, absolutely all over me. I can't make it out." "Oh, that's all right. The fact is, old man, I know you won't mind, but I told him that you were the author of those books I've been reading to him."
"What?"
"Yes, I said Rosie M. Banks was your pen name, and you didn't want it generally known because you were a modest and retiring sort of chap. He'll listen to you now. A brightest idea, what? I doubt if Jeeves could have thought of a better one. Well, pitch it strong, old lad, and keep steadily before you the fact that I must have my allowance raised. I can't possibly marry on what I've got now. If this film is to end with a slow fade out on the embrace, at least double is indicated. Well, that's that. Cheerio."
I always look back on that lunch with a sort of aching regret. It was the lunch of a lifetime, and I wasn't in a fit state to appreciate it. Most of the time, I might have been eating sawdust for all the good it did me. Old Little struck the literary note right from the start. "My nephew has probably told you that I've been making a close study of your books of late," he began.
"Oh, yes, he did mention it. How do you like the bally things?"
"Mr. Wooster, I am not ashamed to say that the tears came into my eyes as I listened to them. It amazes me that a man as young as you can have been able to plumb human nature so surely to its depths, to write novels so true, so human, so moving, so vital."
"Oh, well, it's just a knack," I said.
And by the way, do you like the cooking?
I was so relieved that we had got off the subject of my literary output that I shouted approval in a ringing baritone.
"I am delighted to hear it, Mr. Wooster. I may be prejudiced, but to my mind, that woman is a genius."
"Absolutely," I said.
"She's been with me 7 years, and in all that time I have not known her guilty of a single lapse from the highest standard. Except once, in the winter of 1917, when a purist might have condemned a certain mayonnaise of hers as lacking in creaminess. But one must make allowances. There had been several air raids about that time, and no doubt the poor woman was shaken. But nothing is perfect in this world, Mr. Wooster, and I have had my cross to bear. For 7 years I have lived in constant apprehension lest some evilly disposed person might lure her from my employment. You may judge of my dismay, Mr. Wooster, when only this morning the bolt fell. She gave notice. Good Lord! Your consternation does credit to the heart of the author of A Red, Red Summer Rose. But I am thankful to say the worst has not happened. The matter has been adjusted. Jane is not leaving me.
Good egg.
Good egg indeed, though the expression is not familiar to me. I do not remember having come across it in your books. Speaking of your books, may I say that what has impressed me about them, even more than the moving poignancy of the actual narrative, is your philosophy of life. Let me tell you, I appreciate your splendid defiance of the outworn fetishes of a poor-blind social system. I am ashamed to say that there was a time when I was like other men, a slave to the idiotic convention which we call class distinction. But since I read your books, I might have known it. Jeeves had done it again.
You think it's all right for a chappie in what you might call a certain social position to marry a girl of what you might call the lower classes?
Most assuredly I do, Mr. Wooster.
I took a deep breath and slipped him the good news. Young Bingo, your nephew, you know, wants to marry a waitress, I said.
I honor him for it, said Old Little.
You don't object?
Oh, on the contrary.
I took another deep breath and shifted to the sordid side of the business. I I hope you won't think I'm butting in, don't you know, I said, but, well, how about it?
I fear I do not follow you.
Well, I mean to say his allowance and all that. The money you're good enough to give him. He was rather hoping that you might see your way to jerking up the total a bit.
Old Little shook his head regretfully. I fear that can hardly be managed. You see, a man in my position is compelled to save every penny. I will gladly continue to my nephew's existing allowance, but beyond that I cannot go. It would not be fair to my wife.
But you're not married.
Not yet, but I propose to enter upon that holy state almost immediately. The lady who for years has cooked so well for me honored me by accepting my hand this morning.
A cold gleam of triumph came into his eye.
Now let them try to get her away from me. Young Mr. Little has been trying frequently during the afternoon to reach you on the telephone, sir,
said Jeeves that night when I got home. Oh, I'll bet he has. I had sent poor old Bingo an outline of the situation by messenger.
He seemed a trifle agitated.
I don't wonder, Jeeves, I said. I'm afraid I've bad news for you. That scheme of yours, reading those books to old Mr. Little and all that, has blown out a fuse.
They did not soften him?
Oh, they did. That's the whole bally trouble, Jeeves. I'm sorry to say that fiancée of yours, Miss Watson, you know, the cook, you know. Well, the long and short of it is that she's chosen riches instead of honest worth.
Sir?
She's gone and got engaged to old Mr. Little.
Oh, indeed, sir.
You don't seem much upset.
The fact is, sir, I had anticipated some such outcome.
I stared at him. Then what on earth did you suggest the scheme for?
To tell you the truth, sir, I was not wholly averse from a severance of my relations with Miss Watson.
In fact, I greatly desired it. I respect Miss Watson exceedingly, but I have seen for a long time that we were not suited.
Now, the other young person with whom I have an understanding...
Great Scott, Jeeves, there isn't another.
Yes, sir.
How long has this been going on?
For some weeks, sir. I was greatly attracted by her when I first met her at a subscription dance at Camberwell.
My sainted aunt, not... Jeeves inclined his head gravely.
Yes, sir. By an odd coincidence, it is the same young person that young Mr. Little... I've placed the cigarettes on the small table. Good night, sir.
And thank you all for tuning in.